Welcome to the next interview that we're having on the Northwest School of Business and Governance YouTube series. And I'm privileged to have Pieter du Toit this afternoon and have a discussion on fake news. Pieter du Toit is the editor of Huffington South Africa and a well-known journalist on South African politics and events. Pieter, welcome.
Thank you, Theo.
Recently we had the story of the Deputy President's affairs, emails and all kinds of things. The media were buzzing and so on and so on. Some people are saying it's fake news. Is that a good example of what fake news really is?
It's probably not the best example, but it's certainly an example of the way in which planted news is being used to further an agenda, or the way in which news is manipulated, or a disinformation campaign is being staged. Now, the interesting thing about the Cyril Ramaphosa issue was that there are kernels of truth in these emails, and that's a feature of what we're seeing happening in the media environment at the moment. What propagandists do, and ANN7 are very good at that. There are a number of other websites as well. They take kernels of truth and that they build these narratives around it. So it's an example of this, of a smear campaign that's going on. But there still are questions around how much of what the Sunday Independent published is true. We aren't sure of that.
But I'm asking this question specifically because we get questions from students, from business people, from our MBA students. What is it that they can read? When can they believe journalism, newspapers, websites, the social media?
Yes.
Can you give us a form of distinction? If you really want to know whether what you're reading is relatively true?
It's very difficult because we live in an era of too much information. We live in an era of social media. 10 years ago, we were at Polokwane with the ANC's elective conference. It was before Twitter. It was a year after Facebook came into being. Now, that's a total different world.
Yeah, absolutely.
We now operate in a world where social media is part of our daily lives, where you have something like Twitter bots, and we saw that with the Gupta leaks and with the proliferation
so a
of
Twitter bot is almost a fake Twitter account.
Exactly. A Twitter bot is so let's look at the white monopoly capital narrative that was built around Minister Pravin Gordhan. It was a hashtag WMC, and what the fake news propagandists did was they created a number of fake Twitter accounts. And then they start with one Twitter bot, they call it, and that fake Twitter bot tweets a message. Pravin must be fired because he's in the pockets of the Rothschilds and the Ruperts. Then it gets retweeted by the other fake Twitter accounts. Then it gets picked up by someone like Andile Nkutama.
So now you've got an impression that there's a whole discussion going on.
Absolutely, you're 100% correct. You create the impression that there's a wave of sentiment, wave of people sharing the sentiment. So that's just one example. Another example is websites that are specifically created to disseminate false information. We saw that recently with the attack on Pieter Bruce, who was the former editor of Business Day, which published fanciful photographs of him apparently having an affair and sending that out into the world, which turned out not to be true. So there's different forms of fake news. The more sophisticated forms of fake news is when false news is planted rather at a reputable media institution. So, for example, I, as the editor of Huffington Post, get a dossier called the Ground Coverage Report, which purports to give details about a meeting held in the Natal Midlands about a number of ANC leaders wanting regime change.
Yeah.
Then I publish that without checking the facts. That's the planting of fake news. So if you want an answer, I think how to discern between fake news institutions and real news institutions is you need to follow and read sources of news that are produced by reputable news agencies and companies. Now, that itself does not absolve a company or an institution from publishing fake news. So read widely and make sure that when you read Times Live, for example, it's not T1 Times Live. Instead of the I, it's a 1.
I've seen that on social media like Facebook, where the source is a very funny name,
Yes.
and that immediately red flags the issue for me.
Absolutely.
And I would say people should check that.
Yes. So 702, for example, also became a victim of fake news, as did Huffington Post. There was a whole fake site created which looked exactly like our site, but instead of the O, there was a 0. So it said Huffington, but instead of the O, there was a 0. So it looked like the real thing, but if you looked carefully, it was a 0 instead of an O in the Huffington Post masthead, and it published all sorts of fake news reports, which was shared on social media. And then these things take on a life of its own. You know, it's a wave that just keeps on going. It's a ripple. The ripple effect is in the social media era. The ripple effect is very serious.
I want to ask two questions. The one is Bell Pottinger seems to be being a victim or being part of this process in some way or another, and the enormous role of fake news in the US at the moment. Trump and
yes.
everything that goes on along. First, let's talk about Bell Pottinger. It seems to me they're one of the first big victims of this fake news business.
Well, I think you're going to struggle to find any South African that will characterize them as a victim. I think most South Africans are very glad that they've been caught out. So Bell Pottinger, this PR company from the UK, they've done very. They've been involved in some very doubtful deals over the years. They did work for the Pentagon in Iraq. They did work for Chilean dictator Augustin Pinochet. And then Duduzane Zuma went to go and see them to ask them to help him change the narrative in the country because President Zuma was under attack. And what they did was they created a whole campaign targeting wealthy white people, targeting white monopoly capital, and trying to change the narrative. So that was a calculated and very sophisticated way of trying to change the public narrative, and we're seeing that in the States as well.
Yes. Now, what can the normal person do that reads a lot?
Read widely. Read widely, Theo. Don't trust one news outlet. I mean, obviously, I'd like everyone to read only Huffington Post, but I read Business Day, the Daily Maverick, HuffPost, obviously, and a number of other outlets. The truth is somewhere in the middle. So the biggest way to safeguard yourself is to read widely. Us as journalists, we dearly understand that the only currency we have to trade in is our integrity and honesty.
And the normal thing you do with a story is to check and to double check. That's Absolutely. The guarantee we've got reading the, let's call it the conventional press.
Yes. I think we trade in facts and in honesty. If we lose honesty, if we lose our integrity, if we try and spin facts when it's objectively, we can objectively see what the real facts are, then we lose any standing that we've got. So it's something that we're very aware of. And as the media, going towards December with the ANC's conference, we're going to have to be very careful and very secure when we publish information, because everyone has an agenda.
Pieter, thank you very much. I think it was a very informative discussion, and I think people watching this show will now know to look at the media with a little bit more circumspection and to be careful and to watch their sources. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Theo.